In that moment, my heart skipped a beat. The words he spoke were raw, vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. The man standing beside me, the one who had everything, power, wealth, control, was now revealing a side of himself I hadn't known existed. His voice trembled slightly, and I noticed how his hands gripped the railing, his knuckles whitening as if he was holding himself back from something deeper. His confession hung between us like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating. I stood still, trying to process everything he'd just shared. I'd always known there was more to Grayson than what he let on. But this was different. He wasn't just the intimidating man I'd met. He wasn't just the cold billionaire. He was someone who had carried the weight of his past for so long, someone who was afraid to let anyone close enough to see the truth. My heart ached for him, more than I could put into words. I couldn't imagine living with the burden of those words of that past. I didn't know if I was ready to fully understand the complexity of his history, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to turn away from him. Not now. Not ever. I took a slow, steadying breath and stepped a little closer to him, my hand gently brushing his arm. His muscles tensed, but he didn't pull away. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, expectant, almost as if he was waiting for me to recoil, to run. But I didn't. With a soft exhale, I spoke, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "Grayson," I began, but I didn't know how to finish. What could I say? How could I make him see that none of that mattered to me? That his past, his pain, didn't change who he was right now in front of me? "I trust you," I said finally, the words feeling more real than anything I'd said before. "None of that changes who you are to me. It doesn't change how I feel about you." His eyes flickered with something, hope maybe, or disbelief. And for a moment I thought he might say something, but instead he just nodded slowly, as if trying to absorb what I had said. And that was enough. The silence stretched between us, laden with unspoken words and shared pain. I wanted to be careful to approach his vulnerability with a gentleness he wasn't accustomed to. So after a moment, I hesitated, then asked softly, "Grayson, there's someone else I've been curious about. Someone who might have been here too." He looked at me, his gaze hardening just slightly, as if bracing himself. "Who?" "Your mother. Is she here too?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trying to tread lightly. For a second, something flickered in his eyes, a mix of hurt and something else. Something deeper. Then he looked away, his expression unreadable. "No," he answered, his tone low and raw. "She's not. She died the day I bought this house." My chest tightened and I instantly regretted bringing up the subject. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, feeling the ache of his loss as if it were my own. "I didn't know." "It's all right," he interrupted, his voice steady but softened. He turned to face me fully, reaching for my hands and intertwining his fingers with mine. The warmth of his touch was grounding, yet I could feel the weight of his memories in the way he held on. "Let me show you something." Without another word, he guided me along a narrow path that led around the lake. The water was calm, mirroring the overcast sky, adding a quiet beauty to the moment. "This place," he began, his voice softened with a tinge of pride and sadness, "was my first achievement, something I built without my father's money. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it on my own, that I could make something meaningful." He paused, looking out over the lake, his eyes distant. I thought getting this property would make her happy. It was the kind of home she always wanted, a safe place, a refuge. She used to talk about a life where we'd have something of our own, away from everything, all the darkness. A soft smile crossed his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. She wanted a daughter-in-law who would know our dark side, who would see our ugly past and still accept it, accept me. I tightened my hold on his hands, letting him know I was here, listening, that I wasn't going anywhere. But her wish never came true, he finished quietly, his voice barely audible. The ache in his words seeped into me, making my heart clench. He had dreamed of fulfilling that wish, of giving his mother a life she'd never known, yet fate had taken that chance from him. I squeezed his hands gently, letting him feel my presence beside him. Grayson, you've built something beautiful here. You've created the life she wanted for you, even if she never got to see it. Grayson's gaze softened as he absorbed my words, and I felt a surge of warmth, a need to reassure him even more. Gently slipping my hands from his, I spread my arms, gesturing to the serene surroundings with a smile. I love this place, I said excitedly, walking a few steps ahead. It's beautiful, Grayson. Knowing this was your first achievement, it just makes it even more special. But in my excitement, I missed a step, and the world tilted as I felt myself losing balance. Before I could react, I stumbled forward, plunging into the lake with a splash. Cold water surrounded me as panic seized my chest, and I gasped, accidentally swallowing water. I flailed, desperate for air, as fear gripped me tighter. Suddenly, strong arms were around me, pulling me out of the water. Grayson's worried face came into view as he held me tightly. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I let out a shaky laugh, brushing my dripping hair out of my face. "Yeah," I managed, the panic fading as I caught my breath. Then I laughed a little louder, the absurdity of it all hitting me. "I'm good now that I'm not drowning." A faint smile tugged at his lips, though he was still watching me closely. "You don't know how to swim?" he asked, his voice soft, careful not to hurt my pride. I laughed awkwardly, feeling my cheeks warm despite the chilly water. "It's so embarrassing, right?" I admitted. He shook his head gently. "It's not something to be embarrassed about," he replied, his voice steady and reassuring. "Not everyone knows everything, and that's nothing to worry about because I'll teach you." Before I could respond, he scooped me up effortlessly and carried me out of the lake, water dripping from both of us as he walked us back toward the house. I nestled closer to him, feeling the strength and warmth of his arms, a safe contrast to the cold lake. As we reached the house, he set me down gently in front of the fireplace, his hands lingering on my shoulders for a brief moment. "Stay here," he said, his tone warm yet firm. "I'll grab our things from the car." I nodded, grateful for the heat of the fire beginning to seep into me. As Grayson stepped outside, I looked around the cozy interior of the house, the soft glow of the flames casting shadows along the walls, and I ended in one of the rooms that caught my attention. The furniture was a bit old but in good condition, and was designed as a married room. I could almost feel a sense of warmth here, as if his mother's dreams and presence lingered somehow. A smile crept onto my face, and before I knew it, I was murmuring softly, "I'm sure your mum is happy wherever she is. And proud of you." A voice startled me from behind. "You think so?" I turned quickly to see Grayson standing in the doorway holding our things. His expression was unreadable. I nodded with a gentle smile, meeting his gaze. "Yes, Grayson," I said, this time louder, making sure he could hear the certainty in my voice. "I'm pretty sure wherever she is, she's proud of you." A warmth softened his expression, and he looked at me with a gratitude that seemed almost vulnerable. "Thank you for saying that," he murmured. Grayson placed our bags on the bed, handing me mine. "Here," he said, watching as I rummaged through for something dry to change into. As I glanced up, he began unbuttoning his shirt, the damp fabric clinging to his skin. Caught off guard, I quickly turned away, feeling heat rush to my cheeks. But in a flash, his hand was on my shoulder, turning me back to face him. A mischievous grin tugged at his lips. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice playful. "I'm giving you privacy," I replied, attempting to keep my voice steady. His grin widened, a teasing glint in his eye. Help me get this right. Are you expecting me to do the same, give you privacy? I raised an eyebrow, feigning a nonchalance I didn't quite feel. Is that even a question? A chuckle escaped him, his eyes gleaming with amusement. Are you serious? You're telling me you don't want me to see you change? Are you actually shy? Then, unexpectedly, he laughed wholeheartedly, a deep, rich sound that filled the room. I stood there, captivated, watching him laugh like that, like an ordinary person, free and unguarded. In that moment, he wasn't the ruthless, never-smiling man I'd come to know. He was something more, something beautiful. When his laughter finally subsided, he looked at me with a gleam in his eyes. Sweetheart, he said, his voice dipping. I was literally between your legs last night in case you forgot. My cheeks flamed even hotter at his words, but despite my embarrassment, I couldn't help but smile back. He had a way of disarming me completely, making me feel both shy and bold at the same time. I sat at the small dining table in the kitchen, watching Grayson with wide eyes as he moved around the room with surprising ease. The soft scent of garlic, rosemary, and onions filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile at the sight of him wearing an apron, his normally pristine attire now replaced by something more domestic. He was flipping the steak in a pan, his brow furrowed in concentration, but there was a certain grace in his movements, a calmness I hadn't expected from a man who usually exuded power and control. The sight of him in such an ordinary setting, cooking of all things, had me mesmerized. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my hands folded in my lap, taking in the unexpected beauty of the moment. You're full of surprises, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My voice was light, but there was an undercurrent of genuine admiration in it. I never knew you could even cook. Grayson turned to face me, and for a moment our eyes locked. He raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips as he wiped his hands on a towel. Not just cooking, he replied, his voice low and teasing. There's no job I've never done. I tilted my head, a playful smile tugging at my lips as I watched him, intrigued. Really? You've done it all? He nodded, his expression shifting to one of quiet confidence. Everything, he said, his tone steady. But there was a glint in his eye that hinted at stories untold. From cooking in kitchens like this to handling the most dangerous business negotiations, I've done it all. He took a step closer, setting a plate of food in front of me with a flourish, steak accompanied by smoked vegetables and a side of fragrant rice. But there's something about this. This feels real. My heart fluttered a little, and I couldn't help but appreciate how this side of him, so far removed from the ruthless man I'd first met, seemed so much more human. It was like I was seeing him for the first time in a way that went beyond the sharp suits and cold exterior. It was refreshing. Well, I said, my voice softer now, I'm glad to see this side of you. It's nice. I reached for the cutlery he'd placed beside my plate and took a tentative bite of the steak. My eyes widened in surprise at how good it was. This is amazing, I said, looking up at him in awe. You're not just good with business, are you? He shrugged, a modest smile tugging at his lips. I try to be good at everything I do, he said, then his tone softened. Especially for you. A warmth bloomed in my chest, and I found myself reaching for his hand, my fingers brushing over his in a soft, quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been said and unsaid between us. It felt like we were stepping into new territory, something more vulnerable, yet more real than I'd ever imagined. Well, I murmured, my gaze meeting his. You're doing great so far. He leaned in slightly, his voice quieter now. I'll keep surprising you then. As I sat there, watching him and savouring the meal he'd made, I realised just how much there was to Grayson, so many layers I had yet to uncover, and I couldn't wait to see what else he would reveal. The warmth of the fire seeped into me as I leaned against Grayson's chest, his arms wrapped around me in a way that felt protective and grounding. The room was filled with a comfortable silence, only the gentle crackling of the fire keeping us company. I hadn't felt this kind of peace in a long time, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself to leave it unbroken. After a while, I found myself breaking the silence, my voice soft. I also don't have a mother. The words slipped out as if they'd been waiting, buried deep, to finally be spoken aloud. Well, technically I do, but she left right after I was born. She ran away because she didn't want to look at me. She blamed me for my father's death. A sigh escaped my lips, carrying with it a piece of the weight I'd carried for so long. Grayson's arms wrapped around me a little tighter, holding me like he could shield me from the memories. My brothers were so young when it happened. Gabriel was the oldest, but even he barely knew what to do. They were just kids, scared, lost, but they took me home and raised me. I let out a soft, bittersweet laugh, a mixture of warmth and sorrow flooding through me. They made me feel like a princess, but they were tough on me too, because they knew this world was full of evil people like me. Grayson's voice cut in, a bitterness laced in his tone. I shifted to look at him, catching his troubled gaze. No, I whispered, reaching up to gently touch his cheek. I didn't mean you. But it's the truth, Ariana. I took you from them. Something about the way he said it, like he truly regretted that part, struck me deeply. I leaned in and brushed a kiss to his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of his beard against my lips. That's in the past now. And besides, you're not the villain here. I was bound to find my way to you. I settled back against him, finding comfort in the steady beat of his heart beneath my hand. My brothers Ethan and Gabriel still hate our mother, but Matthew and we always wanted to meet her, especially me who never even got to know what she looked like, not even in pictures. Gabriel burned every single one. A strange mix of longing and sadness twisted inside me, and I felt myself slipping back into that old ache of wondering. Before I could say anything else, Grayson's voice came soft but firm. Would you want me to look for her? The words took me by surprise. I looked up at him, meeting his gaze, my heart catching in my chest. There was something in his expression, a kind of quiet determination I hadn't expected. Part of me felt a rush of hope, a flutter of curiosity and longing. But there was something else too. Fear. I don't know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Part of me has always wanted to meet her, but another part of me. What if she still feels the same way? What if seeing me just brings back all that pain? His fingers brushed my cheek, the gesture so gentle it made my heart ache. If you want to find her, I'll help you, he said quietly, his voice like an anchor. And if she's not ready to meet you, then you'll still have me. As his words lingered in the air, filling me with a warmth I hadn't felt before, I found myself moving instinctively, shifting to straddle him. Wrapping my legs around his waist, I leaned down, pressing my lips softly to his, letting the emotion of the moment spill out between us. Grayson responded immediately, his lips parting to deepen the kiss, his tongue brushing against mine as our breaths grew quicker. The fire crackled beside us, but the heat growing between us was even stronger. His hands moved slowly, slipping beneath my blouse, his warm fingers tracing their way up my skin, leaving a shiver in their wake. When his hands reached me, cupping my chest with a careful, possessive touch, I felt a gasp escape me, swallowed by his kiss. The sensation of his hands against my bare skin sent a wave of pleasure that rippled through me, making me feel as though I was melting into him, losing myself in his touch. Every thought, every worry disappeared, replaced by the closeness, the warmth, and the gentle fire that blazed between us, turning everything else to ash. As I pulled back, I reached for the hem of my blouse, lifting it over my head as Grayson's eyes followed each movement, dark and intense. He shed his own clothes in a seamless response, and when we were bare before each other, there was a stillness, a moment of unspoken reverence as our eyes met. The world around us faded away until there was only him, only us, wrapped in this fragile yet fierce connection. Gently, he guided me down onto the soft rug, the warmth of the fire flickering over our skin. Before I knew it, he had settled between my legs, his lips brushing against my center with a softness that belied the intensity building within me. His mouth moved with exquisite precision, and I felt myself unraveling under his touch, his name escaping my lips in breathless gasps. My hands tangled in his hair, clinging tightly as wave after wave of pleasure surged through me, each one pulling me closer to the edge. But just as I was on the brink, he pulled away, leaving me trembling and breathless. He moved up my body, leaving a trail of kisses that set my skin ablaze until his lips met mine, and I tasted the remnants of my own desire against his mouth. In one swift, unguarded motion, he slid into me, filling me completely, making me gasp as a mix of pleasure and a hint of delicious pain melded together. He started slowly, each movement a deliberate stroke that drew me deeper under his spell. But soon, his pace quickened, the rhythm building with an urgency that matched our racing breaths. My moans filled the space around us as he drove into me, over and over, carrying me to a place where words disappeared and only feeling remained.